Hello dabblers of the internet, JP here with another Kings of War battle report, and it's actually 3 battle reports covering the tournament performance that I had at Winter Carnage, a small one-day tournament down here in Victoria, Australia. If you're interested in watching this, then watch on. So Winter Carnage is the name of one of our regular 3-round one-day events that we have every 2 months or so that are hosted by Mike Crossman, usually at Games Portal, because they are really good hosts for this tournament, and it's just a fantastic place to be. Now, this particular event was called Winter Carnage because it's, it's quite a lot of winter going on, and the carnage not only refers to the battles that will be happening and the models that will be lost, but also refers to the fact that it's really hard to get a whole lot of people together in one place during winter, thanks to, well, myriad of factors such as COVID and everyone getting sick with all other kinds of things too. So people are last-minute cancellations as they couldn't come. But still, we managed to get about, I think it was 16 people, which is not bad at all, especially for just the 3-round, because no one should end up going against the same person at all, and there should be really no problem with those pairings. So yeah, overall, very good attendance, I think, for the Winter Carnage. And yeah, so this was my first tournament taking 2 different things. So first was my first tournament taking Goblins. So I need to start practicing my Goblins in anticipation for the bigger tournament that a 2-day event will be having here in Melbourne later in the month. And so I just need to get some practice using the list that I've come together with. A list that doesn't have much flexibility in terms of change, because I'm literally been painting this non-stop since February when I finished CanCon. And so, yeah, there's not much flexibility in it, but I just need to learn how to use it and get better at it. And so the other thing I've been doing for the first time is using an action camera. So as part of my early birthday present, Florina, the other dabbler, got me an action camera because I wanted something a little bit more immersive when it comes to tournament reports, because obviously at tournament reports there's limited capability for recording what's going on. You can't just sit there and just record the whole thing because it'll be noisy, and you can't get the best angles, and people will not want to be trying to walk around your camera, especially other people. Maybe your opponent might be fine with it, but there's a lot going on. And then at the same time, you can't be holding the camera all the time because you really need to pay attention to what's going on in the battle or on your clock as well. So I can't just be getting the perfect shots of what's going on. So I need something that's in between. So that's where I'm now transitioning from doing just the snaps, which I think are still good and I can always fall back on. But I wanted to use an action camera to capture some of everything that's going on in a kind of a sweeping way. So that's why I've got the footage that you'll see in this episode the way it is. Now the downside is it's new, so still got to mess with some of the settings. So this is the Ghost Drift XL. It's a action cam that's a bit more it's more of a budget one in terms of the GoPro, but its advantage over the GoPro, which can only last about 1.5 to 2 hours with recording, is this one can go for up to 8 hours. So that means a day of tournaments, no problem. So what I would do is I would just turn it on and kind of just point it at various stuff on the battlefield and then just tell it to stop recording, and I just intermittently do that as long as I remember. And I mean, you could say that I might miss something, but that's always the same thing with taking pictures too. How many times do you get to the round 6 and there was no pictures of round 5, and you just have to kind of go off memory. So this downside is that while I was doing this, I hadn't optimized the FPS, so it's got a few different FPS settings, because it can also act as a dash cam. It just meant that my idea of I can pause it, a la Creaky Gamers up in New South Wales. He does now some video reports where he kind of pauses the footage and then talks about it and then lets the footage roll on. I was hoping to be able to do that with this stuff, and obviously I still can, it's video footage, but unfortunately the way it works is I didn't have it on HDR FPS, which whatever FPS that means, so frames per second. It was at 30 frames per second, which still pretty good for the human eye, but when it comes to pausing means that any mid-motion movement comes off as a bit of a blur. So, what did I bring? Let's get into the list. So this tournament is 1,995 points, and obviously I brought the Goblins. The reason this points was picked, is because it's slightly under 2,000, so it means that you end up having to use maybe a couple of items to get to that 1,995, but also it happens to be the points level that half of the Convict tournament will be using, which I'll talk about when we do the Convict stuff. But Convict's a very interesting tournament compared to some others. So, what did I bring for my goblins? Well, I had to bring 2 rebel hordes because you just need something to act as an anvil and just soak up attacks, get in the way. So I've got 2 hordes of rabble because you need them, and they're also good for the unlocks, of which I need plenty. Then I have 3 hordes of trolls, unmodified. They're just trolls. And trolls are pretty good because they're one of the few sources of crushing strength in the goblin army. I mean, you can get a few things of crushing strength 1, but the trolls are really the only source of crushing strength 2. But the downside is that they're merely 4, so they do tend to whiff sometimes. So you got to always make sure you send in 2 rather than 1. And they also have this big differential between their wavering and their rout for their nerves. So that means it's 14-17. So normally it's only a 2 gap between those 2 things, but it's a 3. I think it's harkening back to the idea that trolls are stupid, and so this kind of brings that in, that they're more likely to waver, which I do build in something to my list to fix that, which you always have to do. If you're going troll heavy, you don't just let them sit around. Then I have 2 big rocks throwers, and so that's just to put some ranged pressure on my opponents. And then finally I go into all the stuff there to support them. So I have the king, who's Groany Snark upgraded. Which, if you're not familiar with Groany Snark, or what you should be, I'm sure if you have any goblin person in your scene, they will have made some form of Groany Snark who is supposed to be Tony Stark, i.e. he's supposed to be Iron Man. He's in a mini winged suit, which not only gives him speed 10 and fly, but gives him thunderous charge 2, and also gives him blast D3 on his hits. So you can imagine with his 5 hits, he has the potential to do a huge amount of damage, 15 damage. Especially with that Thunderous Charge 2 crushing 1, he's usually wounding anything he hits on 2s. The only thing is he's merely 4+, so it's actually the hitting that is the tricky part, and he is liable to whiff. There's nothing quite as disappointing as hitting twice out of 5 attacks, and then rolling 1 on each of those D3s, so you just hit twice. But then I've done as high as 9 damage, 15 damage with this guy. Now, you'll be wondering, where is the whiz with Host Shadow Beast? Well, I have been convinced that the Host Shadow Beast is a crutch, and I shouldn't rely on it. And I did, obsequious? I can't think of the word, but I did give in and decide not to put in a whiz with Host Shadow Beast. It would have obviously enhanced it just Groany Snark, but also Grupp Longnail, but in this case, I went without. I do have a whiz, you can see there, with Banechant just to help increase the crushing strength on some of my units. The next is the King with Jareth's Pendant, which gives him a headstrong aura, which is perfect for some wavering trolls, you may think. So that means on a 3+, they're no longer wavered. Fantastic. But you give him the Sacred Horn so it has a wider radius, so it becomes 9 inches on that aura rather than 6. And so that's really his whole purpose is just escorting the trolls down the battlefield. Then I have Grupp Longnail, who is this awesome little blast character as well. He's only got 4 attacks, 1 less than the King, but they're merely 3+, so he nearly always does better, at least at hitting. Unfortunately, he's only got crushing 1, so getting past some of the tougher units is definitely more unreliable. And that's where the Banechant, I've felt, was really essential in getting him to do some damage. I often have to be Banechanting Grupp Longnail rather than anything else, because I really want him to get all that damage through, so that some of his other rules kick in, such as his Fulgur, which is an imposed weakness on anything that he manages to damage. So that unit will have weakness in a way, so -1 to damage when they want to roll. So it's really good for then sending him in to, say, some kind of cavalry that fully relies on Thunderous Charge. So not only are they disordered and don't have Thunderous Charge, but then they'll be also -1 to damage. And he himself, Grupp, has Ensnare in the front, so that means that when they hit him, they'll probably be hitting on like 4s and then wounding on 5s or something. And so often they will not kill Grupp Longnail, and he'll be just a singular individual just sitting in their front. So he's very good at that. But he also has Duelist, so you can send him into some characters, or just make your opponent really scared that you'll send him into characters. He hasn't got Fly or anything, so he's not going to really jump over units to do so, but he's still just a fantastic inclusion, and at 90 points, it's very hard to say why you wouldn't have him in a list. And I do have the Mantic model. It's an awesome little goblin doing like the Kamehameha kind of pose from Dragon Ball Z. And then I have 1 Bang-It as well, just for a little plink damage. I had a few points left over, and here we are with a Bang-It. What could be in this instead of a Bang-It? Well, I could mess around with the points a bit and maybe just go for a Blaster instead, but at this point I hadn't hadn't made one, and so the Bang It is just an individual, far quicker to paint up, and so that's what I included. Now the final part is, and the additional unit strength is the Gorp's Spotomatic Bang Sticks. So this is the formation that's exclusive to Goblins, and it is fantastic, I have to say. So it's two regiments of Fleabag Riders and one King on Fleabag. And so what do they get for being part of this formation? Well, the King on Fleabag gets an Elite Aura, which is already great, because Fleabag Riders have Vicious, so they reroll their 1s to wound, and then you give them Elite, they're rerolling their 1s to hit. So that's just a fantastic combination. And they get one more Thunderous Charge, so they become Thunderous Charge 2. But the real power comes in the fact that when they roll 6s to hit, anything in this formation, when they roll 6s to hit, it counts as Blast 2, so that they suddenly start duplicating some of their attacks. So I've had them go in and people are like, oh, they're hindered, they're not going to do anything. But then, I'm rolling 5s and 6s, and 6s are what I want to see. So if I get a bunch of them, I can just suddenly get 10 hits out of what might have looked like nothing, like 5 hits, just bang, it goes up. The downside is for each of those 6s that they roll, they do 1 damage to themselves. The idea that the bang sticks, they're exploding themselves, which is fine. They don't have to take a nerve test for it, but it usually means that after the first or second charge, they're really quite fragile, and it'll only take just a sneeze to get rid of them. And some charges might even make you consider not doing so, because you might see, say, a War Machine. These guys are speed 10, so they're often, after a first charge, in range of some War Machines at the back, War Engines, but you don't want to, because triple attacks means that you will be rolling a couple of 6s for sure, and detonating yourself to oblivion. So that's why these require some restraint, but otherwise they're really quite fantastic. But most of the time you just got to send them in quickly, because they are quite fragile. They're only defense 4, 13, 15, so you can't have them sitting around too much doing nothing. Now one of them does have Sir Jesse's Boots of Striding, just because I did find that the ability on any given battlefield to get both of them into anywhere unhindered is pretty difficult. Having to use the shortest route, usually someone has to go through. So then I bit the bullet and decided that one of them will have the striding, and they will be the ones that will always be, wherever a charge takes them through terrain, that will be the one that would take that path, and then the other one would be optimized and moved into place so that it doesn't have to cross anything on the charge. And so that's my whole list. And so you can see the whole idea of this list is that you just put the rabble in front of the trolls, move everything up with the characters all milling around, shooting down, and then on the flank you'll be having the whole formation. The formation's great because it really just goes together, because the King on Fleabag provides that inspiring. He has the Elite Aura, so it all just sits by itself on the side. You needn't worry about anything else with it, apart from, sometimes I send maybe Grapplong now along for the ride, even though he's vastly slower. So yeah, that's my list for Goblins, and let's get into the first round and see who I'm up against. Round 1, I was against Matters, Empire of Dust. So Matters is his name, he goes by the name Matters, and he is new to Kings of War. This is actually his second ever game, but he's taken to Empire of Dust. He's got the starter army already, and he's putting up with those plastic metal monstrosities from the original starter box, but he's looking forward to the new stuff, that's for sure. But for now, he has borrowed an Empire of Dust army, and also a list that will actually work, because he's, when you're new to it, you really don't know. You can see what things do, you look at the rules, but you don't really understand what they do, why they're important, until you started using and moving them around on the table. So he's got this very solid list. And he did say he was interested in mummies, so you can see there's a little emphasis on the mummies. So what we have is a Horde of Revenants, quite good, with the Crushing Strength 1 upgrade. We then have 2 Troops of Mummies, which I've never really seen Troops of Mummies before, but looking at their stat line, I can't see any reason why not. They're pretty solid, and only for a few more points, then you just get a bump and nerve, a couple more attacks, and you've got a Mummies Regiment, of which there is 1 in this list. Then we have 1 unit of Scavengers, a regiment of these, so they fly, that's your normal kind of chaff. Then there is a legion of Revenant Chariots, where you know that this is now taking a bit of a detour into some of the nicer things that the Empire of Dust has, rather than the hard things. So it's a legion, they're chariots, they're just hard to use because they're so big, and they really require getting that charge off. Hence it's got Sir Jesse's Boots of Striding. It's also been upgraded with the new Curse Bows, which are quite a cool bow as far as chariots go. But yeah, it's a chariot legion, so it's definitely not the optimal choice. So that's what we have there. Then we have a reanimated behemoth. So that's yeah, bone giant kind of thing. Pretty cool. The monolith to do some sneaky surging, which Matters does quite well considering it's his second game. 2 balefire catapults with the scarab jars. These can put out some very consistent damage. They're just really good, especially having that rerolls built into them. Man, I wish my big rocks throwers had some kind of rerolls in there, but yeah, the balefire catapults are pretty phenomenal. So yeah, he's got 2 of those. The soul snare for that really long range drain life that I am so envious of with my with my Abyssals. So the soul snare just has the 18-inch drain life and 12-inch heal with that drain life. So it's just great. It's an awesome unit to have in that army list, and it helps feed into the whole mummies and the revenants, keeping everything alive. And then we have 2 Ammonite Pharaohs. One is on a royal chariot, which will be going with the revenant chariots, because someone's got to keep up with them. And then an Ammonite Pharaoh with Eternal Guard to help buff the mummies. And so that's this whole list. It's pretty low on the drops, not as very high unit strength, but it is definitely pretty nasty and pretty scary for a goblin player, that's for sure. Scenario round 1 was loot, which is quite a simple scenario where you've just got the 3 loot tokens, 1 in the middle and 2 on either side, about 12 inches away, and they're loot tokens, so you can go and pick them up, and you have to hold them by the end of the game to have won. Quite simple indeed. And I'm going against the Empire of Dust. I have a speed advantage, that's for sure, but I do have the problem of the fact that if they do grab them, it's very hard to get it off them, because they are very durable units indeed. So let's go into deployment. So first on this right flank here, you can see a face-off between the 2 kinds of speedy units that our armies have to offer. We have my Explodomatic Bang Sticks right here, and I've arrayed them, as I discussed, by having the ones with striding, which are on the left. They have a goblin who's holding a banner on the hill. Those Fleabag Riders will probably end up going through that forest, but they are capable of it because now they have Sir Jesse's boots, and the other one's on the other side. Now I'm facing off against that legion of chariots as well as the Pharaoh, and I'm pretty confident about getting that first hit because I'm speed 10 and they are speed 8. Coming to the main part of my army, which is pretty much the rest of it, you can see that I've gone with some layering when it comes to my units. So I have the 2 hordes of rabble that are out the front, and they just kind of scoot on up and take any hits that will come my way, because inevitably they will. But the idea is that they will draw in the enemy so that the trolls can get stuck in from hopefully all kinds of angles. So that's the second layer is of trolls. Up the front, I do have the troll bruiser, which is the Throg model, but I also have then in between the trolls towards the back, I have the king with the Jareth's Pendant and Sacred Horn, and then behind both of them are the war engines, the 2 big rocks throwers. So this is the formation, if you will, like my formation of how I put down this army all the time, and it's good to kind of have these battle groups in your mind for when you're coming to tournaments and just getting a bit tired or maybe a bit overwhelmed with what the other person's list is. It's always good to have your own plan that's always in place, because if you're constantly rethinking of new deployment options, that can get very tiring very quickly when it comes to 3 games in one day. Matters deployed the rest of his army into 2 different chunks due to the fact that there was that blocking terrain that was pretty much right in front of his deployment zone. So we can see on the what he would be his far right, there's the horde of revenants, and behind those are the mummies, as well as being escorted by the pharaoh, so the guy on foot. That's a pharaoh on foot. And behind the building, you can't see it here, is the reanimated behemoth, so that's right there as well. Then when we move past the blocking terrain on our side, on the side that we're looking at, we can see this giant obelisk thing. That's the monolith. So that's a common way of having a monolith represented as some kind of giant obelisk. And indeed is now what the Mantic model looks like. It's a big obelisk but bursting with unholy fire. Quite cool. In front of that is the soul snare, ready to do some drain life shenanigans. And then we have next to that the chaff, that is the desert swarm, and behind those the 2 war engines that are the balefire catapults. Next to those then, and pretty much quite in the middle of the battlefield, we have a regiment of mummies that are not in the forest, they're just sitting out in the open, and then a troop of mummies that are in the forest. So that makes up the whole deployment of Matter's army, and I think overall it's quite good, especially for someone who's deploying this army for the first time. He's never actually really used this kind of list. He's used some Empire of Dust before, but only 1,000 points. So suddenly jumping up to 1995 and then having to figure out how to put it on the table and make it all work, it generally worked quite well. So first turn I move up, and you can see that my goblins that weren't in the terrain went up quite quickly, whereas the others went slowly. My idea is that I need to get onto these tokens pretty quickly, as that is my main advantage. What I do when I hold them, I'm not so sure, because he has quite a lot of ability to destroy all my things with all his different stuff, because he's got high crushing, high piercing all over, and I don't. But just moving up together, and you can see what I didn't introduce in the deployment was where Groany Snark was, because he's such a small, hard to see character. He's right in the middle. I always like to put Groany Snark right in the middle, so he has the option to threaten everything, because he has that speed 20. He's an individual, so he doesn't really need to be facing anywhere in particular, and so him in the middle's the best, and he also has inspiring. So the only downside is when he jumps off on a roll of a 1, he will do damage to himself and everyone nearby. That could be pretty bad if he's central to your army, but yeah. And then also there's the Wiz I didn't introduce. So the Wiz is there, and on the other side of the blocking terrain we have Grupp Longnail, and we also have the Bangit. On the other side, we've just got the Bang Sticks. They're just arraying themselves out of the 16-inch charge range of the Legion, but within my 20. So it's just kind of like, hey, what are you going to do? So all of that kind of stuff is just moving up to, I guess, mess with him, shoot him a bit, and yeah, so it goes into the ranged phase, and I get lucky and manage to take off his reanimated behemoth with a first round shooting from my artillery. How was that possible, you might say? Well, it was because he was 7 inches away from the Pharaoh, so no inspiring. And that, unfortunately, is a lesson hard learned, but a lesson learned indeed about inspiring, because you only ever learn that lesson really once, is that, make sure whatever you want to keep alive is within 6 inches of something important when possible. And in deployment phase, that's definitely when all that kind of stuff is possible, because you get to choose. The Empire of Dust on the main move up. We've got the Revenant Horde that's now just coming up flush with that blocking terrain, with the mummies stuck behind and the Pharaoh escorting them all together, taking the place of where the reanimated behemoth would have once been, but killed it. Very proud of that, as you can tell. Then we have all the other kind of war engines that are the Monolith, the Soul Snare, and the 2 Balfour catapults, all just in the middle, but they've shuffled around a bit. The Monolith is moving into place, so it can be in range, I think, of some cheeky surges for the more distant mummy troop that's there in the forest, which makes sense because they are very slow, and so probably wants to get them moving around. And the Desert Swarmers jumped in front of the Soul Snare to prevent any charges going off, such as from Groany Snark, which is a good use of them, but unfortunately, being height 2, and so the Soul Snare is also height 2, did hamper his ability then to choose targets for the Soul Snare, so that was then quite difficult. But worry not. So when it came to the range phase, before I get to the range phase, the final bit of movement I should cover is that seeing the Bang Sticks coming in, Matters decided that the Legion of Chariots was not worth just leaving there to take a charge, so it has turned-tailed and attempted a redeployment, which is pretty difficult with such a large and cumbersome unit. It doesn't move that fast when it's not charging around, it's just doing 8 inches around, so it has just done a 90-degree turn and head off towards this main part of the battle, while the Pharaoh is holding down the fort and preventing my Bang Sticks from just chasing them down, as they definitely could. So that is the deployment here. So, but as I was saying, the ranged, so that left it just the Balefire catapults and the Soul Snare. The Balefire catapults put a couple of damage on my Goblin rabble that it could see, because the placement of that monolith meant that not much could be seen by one of them, and the other couldn't see much else. It could have taken, I personally, I guess you could have said that it's better to go hitting the trolls, but if you're only being able to shoot with one, then you definitely don't want to be shooting trolls, because chip damage is pretty negligible against trolls thanks to their regeneration. I mean, it's definitely, if you're going to shoot anything, maybe trolls, but the rabble damage sticks, so that's also good. Not that it's hard to kill rabble, let's be Let's be fair. But then the shooting that was successful, because he couldn't soul snare what he intended to, because he was saying, "Oh, can I soul snare this or that?" But I was like, "Oh well, the Desert Swarm's in front now, and they're height 2." What that left was the poor Bangit, and the Bangit got soul snared to death. There was some hot rolling because it was 7 damage that was done in the end. So with the soul snare 9, you can see how that pretty much must have gone off the rails. Poor guy. Turn 2 sees my army moving up yet a little bit further, so the rabble on the right that were already getting a bit far ahead have just nudged themselves onto the token and now gone to pick it up, which is brave of them considering what we're looking at, which is a whole bunch of mummies, but should be okay. Mummies don't have that many attacks. The rabble on the other side have moved up another 5 and turned a little bit just to angle things in what I think is a better way for me. Generally you want to start angling your units when you're about to take a charge in a way that will then be beneficial for resulting charges, but in this case it won't really help the trolls, but it will help the troll bruiser, and we are looking right at that loot token right in front of us, that leftmost one, which I would also like to grab. Then we also have charges, so I have Groany Snark just ploughing into the Desert Swarm because way I see it, that there's no really repercussions of that. I can just charge in, and once he's done, I guess the worst case scenario, if he kills that outright, is that he could get soul snared. But then I don't expect the soul snare to do just quite so well as it did against the Bangit, and it's a bit harder to get him down because he's much higher nerve than a Bangit, and he has Inspiring on himself, so he's more likely to stick around than that poor Bangit. So I think I'm quite safe there. Then when we have on the other side, as I've triple charged the Pharaoh the Pharaoh on Chariot, that is, with my bang sticks. So the whole formation has gone right in there. So there's going to be plenty of damage to take him out, but I feel like I have to invest that much because he does have high nerve and high defense. So anything short doesn't mean that I'll probably get killed, but it does mean that I will be stuck there, and I do have those mummies that are incoming and could get surged in thanks to his repositioning of the monolith. So that's what I'm cognizant of as I'm doing all of this kind of movement. As expected, the bang sticks made short work of the Pharaoh, but the repositioning, as always, is quite tricky when you have triple charges. It's a crowded house and bases are overlapping, so you have only limited agency of moving them around, and I just want to try and avoid a surge flank, but you can never quite really avoid a surge flank, especially when you're out there all by yourself. I don't have anything escorting them, so that's one of the things. But at least I am sitting there ready to threaten a lot of the army, including the Chariots Legion that's running away, and these mummies, and I think I can even see a little bit of the other mummies, so that's pretty cool. In the other combat, well, Groany Snark kind of whiffed 4 damage. Pretty good for a standard king, with only 5 attacks, but for the Groany Snark with his Blast D3, that's pretty dismal, and definitely not a surefire way of getting rid of a Desert Swarm. So I'm kind of stuck here, or I'm just going to fly away if I retain my fly, so we'll see. Even if I don't retain my fly, I'm an individual, I have speed 10, I got options, so we shall see. Empire of Dust turn 2, the whole army, again, just gradually moves up, but now we've got some actual plans in place. So first, we can see that the Revenant Horde is approaching my Rabble Horde, and they're getting dangerously close, and I think there's a cheeky surge in mind, just because that Pharaoh right next to them does have a powerful Surge 8, I believe. Countercharge, obviously, from the Desert Swarm is exactly what is in order there. They don't really have much else they can do. They're disordered, and so they'll go straight back in. The Regiment of Mummies is approaching my Rabble Horde as well, and is also in a surgeable distance, but I think a little bit... Ooh, there's the dog. A little bit further distance to go, so maybe perhaps not as enticing. What finally remains is that we have the Legion of Chariots has done a full 180, turned right around to face now the bang sticks, just because it doesn't want to get charged in the butt. Fair enough. That said, I don't really like doing rear charges with the bang sticks because that means they will really destroy themselves. As I said, triple attacks is not good when you don't want to get the 6s sometimes. But that's the problem with the privilege that the bang sticks brings. And then we have the troop of mummies that have just been nudged closer out of terrain, but since I'm slightly in terrain, they probably will get a hindered charge in if they do get surged. So they have just approached, and you know what's going to happen. You can see the flanky surge. There's no way I could have really avoided that, and so that's where we are. So that surging was successful, and so now having to receive a flank. It's still only 24 attacks hitting on 4s thanks to being hindered, but that will still hurt. And then we also have the Desert Swarm being fully healed up thanks to the Drain Life, so a pretty good range phase as far as things are concerned. While we also cop some damage on the Trolls from the Balefire Catapults. The other surge that was successful, because there is only one source of surge in this army, is the Revenant Horde was pushed right into my Rabble Horde, which I don't particularly worry about. That's what it's there for, but that will be a grindy fest, because Rabble are not very punchy, but can also take a lot of damage, and so they will grind out a while and slow down my Trolls, which is the main thing that I'm just annoyed about. But they're getting slowed down anyway because of this big piece of difficult terrain that sits in my deployment zone that I've been slowly wandering through. So yeah, pretty annoying. Then it comes time to the combats, and so I managed somehow to survive the onslaught that was the mummies in my flank. They don't manage to break me. Obviously, Groany Snark was mostly okay, but still took 1 damage from the Desert Swarm, which means that unfortunately he is now disordered and cannot fly, and he loses his Thunderous Charge. So he's definitely not as dangerous as he was before. But yeah, so that's about the combats, and yeah, obviously the Revenants going into the Goblins do damage, but it's definitely not enough damage to see them destroyed, because hitting on 4s, wounding on 3s will do a lot, but it's just got to be pretty lucky to actually take out the 1921 unit that's inspired. So it's my turn 3, and it's time for all the combats to happen. So, first combat you can see up there at the top, where we have Groany Snark going right into the mummies. So he's jumped over from the Desert Swarm into the mummies. Now, I have made a mistake, that the 1 damage is actually not as a result of the Desert Swarm, it was as a result of himself rolling a 1. Because, yes, he was not disordered, so he still had his fly, and he still has his Thunderous Charge. So, just putting that out there for later when he does some damage. Because the Desert Swarm did whiff, which is not surprising because the Desert Swarm doesn't have the best stats. But now you can see also the bigger combat. So the trap was set for the Revenants that charge into my Goblins. So we've got now a combination charge, a combo charge, if you will, of Troll Horde in one, and then the Rabble as well as the Troll Bruiser in the flank, which is where you usually want a Troll Bruiser if they're going to go anywhere, because now he's got 10 attacks at Crushing 2 with melee 3. Pretty damn good. So hopefully we can get that objective off that unit. Then we have our next combats over here. In the middle we have the other Troll Horde racing off to go kill that Desert Swarm. The idea is that not only will we kill the Desert Swarm, which is somewhat essential, but we did need to then get to that the bloody war machines, war engines happening up there, because they're doing so much damage to all kinds of units that I'm starting to think that I can't weather the storm. And then at the same time we had the Goblins with the objective go into the mummies. Now this, I think, is actually my first major mistake in this game, is that I decided to go for multiple things at once, instead of doing a combo charge of the mummies, because that mummies regiment is really hard to take down, but they hit enough that they'll definitely get through these already damaged Rabble, because they've already got 6 damage on them. And the main reason that I should be doubly, chastising of this is the fact that they are carrying the loot token. So they're running off with it, giving it to perhaps the toughest unit in the whole army that Matters has, is this regiment of mummies. And so this was a delivery, like, here, please take this loot token. Whereas if I either did the charge with the Trolls, maybe I couldn't have, I can't remember. It might have been the case that it's just that logistically wouldn't happen, like the way it all positioned out. But I decided just to send it in the Rabble by themselves, which is silly. I think I tried to I did Bane chant them, but it's we're going into mummy, so it's still 5s and 4s. It's not going to result in that much damage, and if anyone can repair themselves quickly, it's mummies with regeneration and life leech on the same unit. So yeah, this was a silly thing I did. You try and get multiple things at once when really I should be just making sure I get one. And why am I going after the Desert Swarm anyway? I mean, what are they going to do? I guess I thought, I didn't take them out, I really want to, when really that wasn't the case. They're not an issue, they're even in a flank. So yeah, not happy with that. But this is a historical look back at what I did. Then we have here, so I've just turned the flea bags that got wavered in the previous turn thanks to the flanking mummies. So they just have to turn. Nothing I can do about that. But I did bring in Grupp Longnail, who you can see blurry in the bottom there, who has gone into the rear of those mummies to just hopefully put some damage on them. He's only got 4 attacks, but they are pretty good attacks. It's just, yes, he does have a chance of whiffing, so all I need to do is some damage, and I can weaken them at least because he does have that Fulgur ability. And then you can see up there I've double charged the Legion of Chariots finally with the other bang sticks, the Fleabag Regiment, and the King as well. But now the downside is, and this is also something I didn't think of, because I really wanted to get that King in there just for that little extra, little extra damage. But what that has resulted in is now that the King is out of range of Inspiring and of Elite. Less of Elite, it's more Inspiring just to keep these other bang sticks around. So this was just getting a bit too greedy again, in a way. So I should have kept my Inspiring nearby, because a lot of people point at Grupp thinking, oh, is he Inspiring? But he's not. He's a little assassin kind of character. He doesn't actually have an Inspiring aura. And then finally we can just see the rest of my army sitting here, just with the trolls still stuck there in the difficult terrain, not really sure what to do. But what could have been done, and I wish it was, is that if I did drop that token from the Legion, from the Horde of Rabble, I could have picked it up. That's not hard. But I didn't think that far ahead. So yeah, into combat we have a little bit of success with Grupp. He's got at least the 2 damage, so he did the Fulgur on them, so that they're now essentially weaknessed. But yeah, definitely not breaking them, and that's when the crushing 1 is just definitely insufficient for the job. But then the other bang sticks with the King did take out the Legion of Chariots, so that might have actually been worthwhile. And you can see that the bang sticks, which were on full health before, now got 2 and 4 damage on them. So that's just what happens as they get into combat. Those 6s really add up and they start hurting themselves over and over. And yeah, I mean, that's part of their lethality, is they get all these extra attacks, but it does come at a price, and it's not points. Finally, Grupp, even without his Host Shadow Beast, managed to do 12 damage. So if you think about the maximum damage that he's capable of with 5 attacks, D3, it's 15. He was not far off that. He was going crazy. So where he whiffed against the Desert Swarm, he goes into the mummies, this troop of mummies, and does 12 damage all by himself. So good on you, Groany Snark. I think I said Grupp. So yeah, Groany Snark being very formidable indeed. So not a bad combat round. And then when we have just our final combat, I did smash into the skeletons there. They are physically skeletons, but the Horde of Revenants, and did a lot of damage, but I don't think I broke them. But we will see in the next round. And I definitely destroyed that Desert Swarm, that's for sure. Turn 3 for the Empire of Dust sees a whole lot of return action for all my forays into combat. So we have the mummies, the troop of mummies, continuing to go into the bang sticks regardless of whether a Grupp is annoying them or not, because they just really don't care. So they're going to make sure they get rid of them, which makes sense because they're already on 5 damage. It's not hard to push them much further when they're just 13, 15 and defense 4. So wounding on 2s, fantastic. Not good for me. Actually no, wounding on 3s because the Fulgur. At least there's that. Now, over here we have also the Revenant Horde has decided to take on the Trolls exclusively. I just did see the damage dice when I was looking at this particular footage and saw that it was 13 damage. So all of this combined, we've got the 18 attacks from the Trolls in the front, 10 attacks from the Bruiser in the side, and 25 attacks from the Goblins. And we did 13 damage. And mind you, these aren't any special Revenants. They're crushing 1 defense 4 Revenants. So I don't know, it must have been some really bad rolling that just I got out of my mind, just out of some form of PTSD. So here they are taking their revenge on the Trolls. At least it shouldn't be too bad because they are hitting on 4s, wounding on 4s. So I don't expect all that much damage as a result, but still, the fact that it got to this point is not good. Over here, the Pharaoh has decided that his attention needs to be put into this crazy Groany character that has the capabilities to take out troops of mummies all by himself, and fair enough. This usually happens. This is how Groany works. Groany surprises the opponent, Groany kills something of the opponent, and then they actually start dealing with him. You can tell people who have fought him before because they get to step 3 right at the start of the game. Then we look at the best of the battlefield. So obviously the trolls finishing with the Desert Swarm just had to reform and look at the flank of the mummies. So this is my idea. It's like, okay, I can demolish these mummies now once I get this flank attack, even though it is going to be hindered. Look at that wonderful obstacle right there. And he just countercharges my my rabble just to get through them. So that makes sense because he does want that objective, which is what I'm aware of. So anyway, with all the charges done, it's time to get into the shooting phase, and he's only got a few things he can shoot with. He's got a soul snare, and he has the 2 balefire catapults, and guess what? All those combined are sufficient in destroying some inspired trolls. So those trolls that were just there, they turned, well, you can see they're not here anymore. There's their damage dice. They are now gone. So that's one horde of trolls down, which is quite scary from that shooting. So I mean, they weren't holding anything, but they were the decider in getting those goblins free of those mummies. But it's just how things work when you've got a few balefire catapults. If you've followed my battle reports, you remember from the Clash of Kings in Canberra how I was being attacked by balefire catapults in another Empire of Dust list. So it's not my first rodeo of losing precious units to these demolishing war engines. Now, the Pharaoh manages to do a fair bit of damage onto Groany, so that was the first combat to happen. But just, it was, 3 damage, not too bad. He hasn't got that many attacks anyway, and so Groany's not really going anywhere, and he is now wavered. And so, wavered Groany is not a good Groany, and is the only way I could save him is possibly to bring my Headstrong Aura over, but it really is needed elsewhere, that's for sure. So maybe perhaps goodbye Groany next turn. So the Revenant Horde with Crushing Strength 1 managed to do 6 damage in total on the trolls, which is pretty much bang on average, and so they can definitely survive that. All good. I've got my Lord nearby, and I've got Inspiring, so it's all fine and dandy. And then when we go to the next combats, well, we can see that the rabble are holding all right. They're holding their own against the mummies because there is only 12 attacks, and it takes them a long time to get through. And 12 attacks reminds me is the fact is that troop of mummies wouldn't have been doing 24 in their flank. It would have been doing a bit less because they are only a troop. So I think it's 6 they have. So yeah, no wonder the bank sticks survived that first round, but surviving a few more, I don't know. And that's what we have to see is actually they didn't survive this round of combat. They were destroyed by the mummies, and so now it's only Grupp over there to stop them from getting onto that objective, which they now certainly can. So that is mildly terrifying. So my turn 4, we get the combo charge again, this time just for the trolls and the troll bruiser, because the rabble really don't contribute much in that regard, and I think I just want them free to do something else. Let's just say I didn't quite have a plan, but now they're not part of it, and so it just makes things a bit neater. And you can see that also the king with the sacred horn has come over, because all that's left on the other side is just the rabble against the bloody mummies, and I feel like that's just not quite irredeemable, but almost there. Now that was a mistake, perhaps, but also leaving him right out there makes him very vulnerable to things like Drain Life, whereas if I bring him over here, he's maybe less likely to be noticed, perhaps, but also it's the idea of bringing Groany back to life. The downside is that now Groany, even if he were to attack back, he is hitting on 4s, wounding on 5s, because he only has his Crushing 1, and the Bloody Pharaohs have Defense 6. So the likelihood of him actually doing anything in return to the Pharaoh, who has a buttload of nerve, is very unlikely indeed, and so not perhaps the most sound idea. What I've since learned to do with Groany is to actually just get him out. Like when he gets into something and fails, you just leave. He can usually always leave any situation. He might have lost fly, but he's still speed 10, so he can just turn and go anywhere else. And most things can't follow him. If it's someone else who's got flying, like Wings of the Honey Maze or something, that's a different deal. But that's some of my advice for any of you prospective Groany users, or any flying guy kind of users, is just get them out, because they can. The next combat we have over here is that the bang sticks are still stuck in, but it's a different bang stick. So those other ones are dead, and now I've charged into this troop with fresh bang sticks and a king in the flank, because he was in their flank. So is this enough to remove a troop of mummies? Because if we can, then we can grab that objective. How we can hold it, I don't know, with all this kind of artillery fire going on, I don't know. But the first thing is to just stop this unit from existing, and that would be fantastic, if possible. So then we have our combat also over here. This is the Rabble versus the Mummy Regiment, and we've now put Grupp in here, Grupp Longnail. So he's bounced from one combat to this one because I can see that this one is definitely one that needs to slow down. Because, yeah, I realised I've got an objective on the Rebel Horde. I need to keep it. And so what they've done is they've just disengaged and moved sideways, just so that if these guys, the mummies, were to attack again, they would then have to go over that obstacle and become hindered. And then if I can combine that with some damage from Grupp, then I can also give them weakness. So the idea is that they really wouldn't be doing much damage to my poor goblins. That's the idea anyway. And I got my little whiz there to just help out if possible, because I do need. But I can't see poor Grupp because, yeah, I need to be able to see him to enchant him. So it's not a very good situation, unfortunately. But I'm making the best I can. Now, combat's finished. Well, it's not surprising that finally the trolls pulled their weight and managed to kill the Revenant Horde. So we are free, and the Troll Horde has taken the objective. So I now have one of the loot tokens. I have 2 loot tokens here, so that's quite good indeed. And the Rabble is just sitting there backed away. The next combat that kind of went okay, I managed to put a bit of damage on with Grupp, so they are now weaknessed, and so hopefully when I don't think they're going to face Grupp, they would be silly, because then they'd be ensnared as well. They'll charge, they'll be doing quite a bit less damage. And then moving over to the bang sticks, we can see that we've put a little bit of damage on. I can't quite see the number, but it's definitely still single digits, which is very disappointing considering that this charge is usually where the bang sticks the best. They have their thunder charge too, so I would have been winning on 3s with vicious, and it seems to have done absolutely nothing. So they stick around, and that's very unfortunate for me, because that's now holding up those bang sticks, which really would be helpful if they could come in here and then take out the Mummy Regiment, because the Mummy Regiment is almost completely unsupported apart from all the artillery and war engines there. And yeah, I just need some of my strength to get in there, and I just can't quite get it in. And it just goes to show how powerful those mummies are, and how infuriating. Oh, 6 damage. That's how much I did. So it's just definitely not. No, 8 damage. Anyway, 8 damage, still not enough to take out the mummy troops. They are really quite good at a troop level. You don't lose all that much apart from a bit of the attacks. And so, I mean, no one's getting mummies for their attacks. So it's turn 4 for the Empire of Dust, and Manus really doesn't have many units left, but they don't really have much to do, so I didn't really record anything apart from the combats. And so we have first the fresh charge of the Regiment of Mummies, so they had to go over that obstacle, so now hindered. They have full good, so it's -1/-1 to all their ability, but it still wasn't enough to really dampen the blow, because they still managed to get up to 14 damage and waver my rabble. It's not terrible. I've got my Sacred Horn guy, so he can come back over and hopefully wake them up, get them out of wavering, but it's not looking like I'll have an ability to get rid of these guys, because I need to get rid of them, because eventually they will, next turn, for sure, they will take down the rabble and take that loot token, and then it'll be a draw. What makes matters worse is the fact that the bang sticks over here have been destroyed by the troop of mummies. It doesn't take much, but 6 attacks you'd think would take a while to do, but they get rid of them, and now they are free to just go jog on to that objective, that loot token, and take it. So that is really quite annoying, and I can't do anything about it, because this all that's left on this side is just the king, who's just sitting there trying to do a little bit of damage, but they're currently on 2 damage, which means they've been life leeching, they're regenning, so I just can't get them down. And that's definitely one of the things with the goblins, is they don't have reliable damage output. They can go nuts, but equally they can go very dismally, and so somewhere in between is just normal, and normal is usually not enough to take out things like mummies. And so I'm just kind of watching them and waiting for them to just step over onto that objective, pick it up, and then I'll just not be able to destroy them for the rest of the game. So yeah, that's the end of the turn 4 here. Right now, it's still me with 2 tokens, so that's good, but we'll see what changes over the next 2 turns that remain in this game. So now it's my turn 5, and I need to start keeping these loot tokens to myself. So the trolls are shuffling sideways to just, I guess, take this loot token somewhere safer, and just not get shot by those catapults, because that's what I'm most scared of. And so yeah, they're just moving away, but I'm still not protected from the Soul Snare, who can move around, so that's why I've charged it also with the King, just to get that triple attacks and hopefully destroy it and get some points as well. Right here in the middle, the Goblins have again backed up so that there's a fresh charge that will be hindered, and hopefully also full grid, because I've attacked again with Grupp. And so that's somewhat smart, but you know what would be the smartest thing, and I didn't do, and still I could have done it at any point in the last 2 or 3 turns. I could have just dropped the token, you know? The moment this started looking south, I could have dropped it anywhere on my base, and the cool thing is, I could have dropped it, say, right on the far corner of the Horde base, and make him have to really get an odd angle to walk over and get it. Or I could have done it in a way that I could drop it, and then move my rabble, you know, sideways as they, you know, the withdraw go sideways, and then the Troll Bruiser could pick it up. You know, it's just, why didn't I think of these things? Well, you don't, because usually the first idea when you pick up a loot token is you pick it up to keep it. It's yours. You're gonna hold it. You're never gonna let go. And yeah, this is definitely something I'm still doing at a fundamental level when playing Kings of War, as I'm not really thinking about, you know, handballing it off to better units, or even just the fact that if I just drop it, it's not his, because obviously he would have to walk onto it, and mummies aren't that great at walking, but hey, they're reasonably good at killing, and if they kill it, they get it off the unit that they kill, and they can't have it if I wasn't in possession of it. So anyway, there's just this kind of thing that I think of when I look back at these. And finally, yeah, the King on the Fleabag part of the last bit of the Bang Sticks has gone off into the Monolith to hopefully stop that doing something. If anything, just disorder it, but yeah, he realized that he can't take on these mummies because they're just nigh indestructible, although I probably should have kept on peppering them, because with 2 damage on them, maybe I can get them to the point where I'll just luckily get rid of them because there's no inspiring. But yeah, I was in a bit of damage control mode and just like, oh, what can I do? So this is what I thought I could do. So it's turn 5, and the Empire of Dust see that victory might just be out of their grasp, but there's a few plays that they can yet make. So Matters has sent the Pharaoh into my trolls, who's only got 5 attacks, but 5 attacks is sometimes all you need. So he sent him into the trolls, who have got the objective with nothing else on that side that can really do it, thanks to my movements and getting rid of the Soul Snare with the wonderful King. Then on the other sides, where we haven't seen much else movement, we've just got the charge again with the Regiment of Mummies going back into the Rebel Horde to try and get that token off them, while we have the other mummies just moving on up, ready to get into a flank if they can get there in time. So now, what I have for you is an actual clip with the original audio.
I would laugh if he kills them. 5 attacks, not likely. 5 attacks, hitting on 3s. Ooh, not bad. And then winning on 2s.
No, he's crushing 2, so winning on 3s.
Winning on 3s. So it's 2 more damage. That takes it to 5.
Yep. 17, and I think I'm outside of...
Yes, you are!
Oh, they drop it.
That's hilarious!
So you can see, now I've lost a token and only have 1 left. Well, guess what happens? The Regiment of Mummies then kills the Rebel Horde and takes the token as well. So now he's got 1 token and I've got none. How did this happen? I certainly wasn't playing on easy. I was actually trying to win here. So yeah, this definitely took me by surprise. Turn 5, everything going to shit. It's turn 6 and it's getting to crunch time, and I'm going to go through both the turns together because there's really not all that much happening. So we've got the rabble that are consistently taking damage now from the war machines because they're just too long. I can't get them out of sight. But what they have done is they have sidestepped onto the token, which I finally dropped only because I was forced to by Pharaoh. And so at least I now have 1 loot token back. So it's now looking at a draw, which is certainly much better than a total loss. That said, we're still trying to get the other token with the trolls. Both trolls, the Troll Horde and Troll Bruiser, are going into the mummies, so we hope we can get something done here. And at the same time, the other mummies, the troop of mummies, we're just trying to take out with all the individuals that I've got. So that's the King and Grupp. You'd think that those guys together should hopefully be able to do enough damage to take these guys down, but still, between them, they've only got a crushing strength 1, and that's just not quite enough to reliably do anything. I did think I had the whiz here for some potential Bane Chantness, but I probably just failed. And so, yeah, maybe a Host Shadow Beast would have been really nice in this particular occasion, but this is the crutch that will kill me, I'm sure. And yeah, we, getting into this combat, don't manage to actually kill the mummies with the trolls, and so we continue on flailing our arms, trying to just give us the token back, please. And we'll just see how that goes, maybe into if there's a turn 7. On Matter's side, well, he's got limited options, but one of them is the Pharaoh, who apparently can kill everything, and has now charged the Rebel Horde. It's a bit more nerve to deal with, you've got to get up to 21, but they've already got 11 damage on them, and so that's what he's going to kill there. Thankfully, this means I can't be shot, so he's obviously putting more stock into his Pharaoh than into his Balefire Catapults, which I think have been going silent the last few turns anyway, with little to shoot at. Over here we have a counter charge of the mummies into my trolls, hoping to take them down, but they've got quite a bit of nerve, and they do have regeneration just like the mummies, so this could go on for a while which we do not have. And then finally, combat starts going into my individuals, and so we'll just see how long they last there. The downside of charging with 2 individuals is that you can get a 2-for-1 deal when you hit into them, so you kill one, you can just go straight into the next one, and so yeah, that's definitely not good, but that's all I had to put in the way, and just prevent him from just marching on in and charging something else. So yeah, we'll just see how we go and look over at turn 7, because I didn't seem to have recorded the actual results. There was a turn 7, and so here we go. It's time to try and get back everything we can and hold what we've got. So I've got a counter charge with the trolls into the front of the mummies, and since the mummies had to slide over a little bit, we've got Throg, my troll bruiser, being able to go in to the flank. So that's exactly where he wants to be. Can I crack the mummies with this much crushing 2 pressure? I don't know, but let's find out. The Rebel has turned to face the Pharaoh and just hit him in the face for all they're worth, which is 5s and 6s, so I don't expect all that much, but it's better than being hit in the flank. It's unsettling. And then finally we have this Wiz that I just put here as not really a roadblock, but just as an enticement, a deterrent, I'm not sure, but that's what she's there for. She's just sitting there. That's my Wiz. So we'll see if that prevents a flank charge, even though a flank charge from these tiny troops is not that big a deal. It's only going to be doing 12 attacks, but still, I'd rather not have to worry about that. So I've done a little teaser, just try to put that in the way. So we'll see how that goes. So it's the last turn of the game. Matters has the last say in what happens here. So I've managed to kill those regiments of mummies. I've taken that loot token. I have 2 of them. One of them now on the Troll Bruiser, well out of range of the mummies. I think that was smart. Finally, something smart with the loot tokens in this from me. Finally. Well, the Goblins are still being harassed by the Pharaoh, who managed to do no damage before. As you can see, the 11 damage has remained unchanged, but that doesn't mean he hasn't got some more action to give. And then we see here we got this Wiz that's just in the way of these mummies that are deciding, well, what do they want to do? Do they want to kill a Wiz, which is a surefire thing, or do they want to go kill trolls, which is probably not so surefire, because they're only on 3 damage and it's 12 attacks. It's not great, but I can see what they're thinking. And you can see that the damage has been popping off onto the Troll Bruiser because he has been shooting with his artillery, just trying to take down this Troll Bruiser, because hey, that's another way to get a token down. But to no avail, unfortunately for him. He does charge into the Wiz with his mummies, I think it was a surge in fact, and fails to kill them. So yeah, he kills 2 individuals before, Grupp, who has Ensnare, and the King, who's just better than a Wiz. They're both better than Wizzes, that's for sure, but can't kill the Wiz. So eventually they just had it run out of energy, but I wish they ran out of energy a little bit sooner, because they're just taking some of my attrition points. But then finally we end here on a still, just looking at the Rabble Horde, and it's because this was the last piece of footage that I ever took, because after this point I was dead, in terms of it became a draw, because the Pharaoh did manage to kill the Rabble, and then the Rabble upon their demise had to drop the token, and it would just sit there, and that just meant my Troll Bruiser had 1, and his troop of mummies had another, and that was it. In the end, it was also quite the draw of 10-10 in terms of attrition as well. Perhaps if he'd taken the risk and gone for the trolls, he could have killed them and tipped it the other way. But at this point, it was a perfect draw, and you can see it was a real bloodbath. All kinds of things getting destroyed. What was the most annoying thing about this game, perhaps for me, apart from all my blunders of that, was probably the artillery, the whiz, the bang it. All these parts of my list just really did nothing. And while artillery is going to do that from time to time, it's just these individuals. There's a lot of them going around, and they all don't do that much. So yeah, I'm definitely thinking about alternatives to these individuals. But yeah, so that was the end of this first game, and I have to say that. You saw these kinds of actions that Matters was taking, prepping his units, moving them up for surges, like that mummy trip. They had that perfect, flank surge into my bang sticks. That was really good, and these kinds of things that normally it takes many, many games to get. So I think that Matters has definitely got some good tactical nous that only needs a polishing of the rules and understanding of the game to really, unleash some hell on some opponents. And I was the first, it seems. And so, yeah, it was a great game. And this was just him borrowing Mike's army, Mike Crossman's. So it's a very beautiful army. But I'm looking forward to see what he's managing to do with some of the new Mantic models that have come out for Empire of Dust. Because obviously these days, if you really want to start an Empire of Dust army from scratch, it's really hard to get those Tomb King models. If you got them from ages ago, that's fine. But what's left that's out there on eBay is not cheap. And some of the Mantic stuff, I think, looks better. Some of it not so much, about the same, but some of I like the new chariots, for instance. They definitely look more robust and formidable, and I do like the revenants, cavalry, and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, we will see him again in future battle reports, but perhaps with a different kind of Empire of Dust army that will grace the battlefield. So this is the first round, and originally I had wanted to do all of these rounds in one go for all three in the one video, but you can see that this actually took quite a long time. It's just seems to be that how I do the battle reports, and I don't think we want to see a 3-hour video because you'll just get lost trying to watch it over and over again, going back to the same spot. So instead, what I've done is I have split them in the end, and so yeah, watch out for episodes 2 and 3 of this tournament, Winter Carnage, because they will be coming out pretty soon as well. And until those, I'll see you next time. So like and subscribe, and bye-bye.